Hey juniors, this is a little lesson today, a little video on the prologue to the Canterbury Tales. I know it's very, very long. There are a lot of characters in there, but rest assured we're only going to focus on some main ideas and a couple of the main characters. I know you've already talked about the Wife of Bath and the Pardoner because we will read the stories next week that those two characters tell on the way to Canterbury Cathedral on the pilgrimage. But today we're going to take another look at those two, but also a few more characters as well, and just a few more concepts. So the first thing I want to talk about today is the idea of characterization. So just kind of follow along with me, and feel free to stop the video if you need to. I'm starting on page 140 in the book. If you have your books, great, get them out. Page 140, go ahead and turn there now. If you scanned all your pages, find this same page, okay, 140. Pause the video if you need to and find that page, and then we'll move on in a second. Okay, don't know if you paused or not, but we're moving on. Okay, literary focus on characterization. Take a look at this with me right here. To create the portraits of his pilgrims, Chaucer uses the same methods of characterization that writers still use today. He reveals his characters by telling us, and here's some bullets here, how the character looks and dresses, how the character speaks and acts, what the character thinks and feels, and this is an interesting one, how others respond to the character. When you watch a movie, especially the first time, and you're introduced to characters on the screen, whether you realize it or not, you start gathering information and forming kind of an opinion, or at least forming a kind of an idea of who this person is based on these things. What they look like, how they're dressed, how they talk, how they act. To some extent, in some films, you get an insight somehow on how they think or feel. And then a lot of times how other characters in the story react to them and how they respond to them. Moving on down to the bottom here, he may also tell us, he also may tell us directly what the character's nature is, virtuous, vain, clever, or so on. But sometimes you have to infer that from what is given. Okay, so characterization we're going to talk about. You're going to have some activities to do with partners. And then the next concept is the idea of a frame story. Frame story you want to think of as a story within a story. Think about a picture that is in a frame, and I may have mentioned this in the video the other day, or I may not have, I don't know. But you may have a picture frame that is quite attractive to look at, and maybe it's even adorned with little engravings, little pictures, something like that. And then, of course, it's a picture frame, so it's got a picture in the middle of it. So what I want to have you do today is pause the video in just a second. I'm going to have you brainstorm as a class with Miss Butcher or Mr. Cannell, depending on which hour this is, and talk about movies. Or novels too, but probably most people are going to be able to come up with movies better than anything. Movies that follow the pattern of a frame story. I'm going to give you one as an example, and then you're going to pause the video and you're going to brainstorm as many movies as you can think of that fit this pattern, just to show you that this technique that Chaucer used in the 14th century is still being used by filmmakers today. All right, so here's one of my examples. Think about The Wizard of Oz. Don't know if you've seen it or not. Most people by this age probably have. But if you know the story of The Wizard of Oz, you know that the original film was shot in black and white. Excuse me, Andy on, it's very late. Judy Garland playing Dorothy. And the tornado comes, picks up the house. She lands in Oz. She steps outside. Now everything's in color, etc., etc. She goes off on this quest and, meets Lion and Tin Man and Scarecrow, and they're off to see the wizard. So it's a big journey story, big quest, and they have all kinds of conflicts along the way. But eventually, all she wants to do is get home. She's got to find the wizard to do that. And then, of course, she gets home and wakes up in her bed, and everything is back in black and white. And it's, it's like it was like a dream. It was like it never happened. So The Wizard of Oz, the original film with Judy Garland, is a good example of a frame story, um, because you have the outer frame, which is sort of the lesser of the two, which is the story of Dorothy being caught in a storm and getting knocked on the head and getting knocked out, and then coming to later. But the inner part of the story, where the picture would be within the frame, is the whole story of what happens to her in the Land of Oz and Munchkin Land and all of that other kind of stuff. So that's one example there. Let me see, one more. Princess Bride, one of my favorite movies. The outer frame is the grandfather telling the story to his grandson, who at first thinks this story is not going to be any good, and kind of is complaining about it, but in spite of what he says, he quickly gets hooked on the storyline, and then he cannot wait to hear what's going to happen next. And so they keep cutting back and forth from what's happening within the story of The Princess Bride outward to the story of this kid getting a great story read to him by his grandfather. Okay, so here's what I'd like you to do. Let's take 10 minutes, whatever it's going to take you, I don't know, and brainstorm as groups or partners as many movies as you can think of that fit this pattern of a story within a story. Okay, story within a story. And then when you come back, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 of my own titles as well. All right, so pause the video now, and then come back and we'll compare notes. All right, pause now. Okay, I am back. I don't know if you have paused or not. I hope you did. This is something we would do if I were in the classroom. We would spend probably a good 5 or 10 minutes brainstorming these things, and just so everybody has a solid, concrete example of a movie that you know, that you like, that you can relate to and say, yes, I know what a frame story is. The Canterbury Tales is a frame story because it's on the outside. It's the story of the pilgrims walking down the 55-mile pathway from London to Canterbury to pay homage and pay their respects to the shrine at Canterbury Cathedral of St. Thomas of Becket. And then the inner part of it is all the little tales that the pilgrims tell along the way. So when I think of other frame stories, I don't know if you mentioned this one, but I'm going to throw it out there. Titanic. Yes, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio and Kate Winslet. You have sort of the frame story. The outer frame is the modern day part where the elderly lady is contacted or contacts the people who are exploring the Titanic, who have discovered it, and she says, I'm the one who is in the picture of the girl with the big, necklace with the big jewel around it. And so there's the kind of the story of her being helicoptered out onto the exploration ship or the salvage ship, whatever it's called in that business. And then she goes in and tells her story about when she was on the Titanic and how she survived and how she met Leonardo DiCaprio and all that great stuff. Okay, so that's my contribution for that. I would also throw out The Notebook. Okay, yes, it's kind of a chick flick, guys, but remember you're listening to a married man here, so I have to earn my hubby points, and yes, I have seen The Notebook. That's another one that kind of goes back and forth between 2 different time periods. Okay, what else? Stand By Me. I just watched this one with my son Nathan the other day. That's also kind of a story within the story, sort of, because you've got the older writer writing the story, and then he goes back in time and tells you the story as it happened. Okay, so hope you came up with some good ones. I hope everybody leaves today with a very concrete example of what a frame story is. All right, we're going to move on. Make sure to look at the vocabulary words as you work through the prologue. Some of them will appear on the test when we take that later. And then take a look right up here where I'm kind of circling here, and just kind of read this along with me. This is something to kind of pay attention to as well, key details. With 29 pilgrims to introduce in the prologue, Chaucer could not develop any one character at great length. Instead, he had to provide a few well-chosen details that would make each character stand out vividly. As you read the descriptions of each pilgrim in the prologue, jot down striking details in dress, appearance, and behavior that give you an immediate impression of what the character is really like. Note that these telling details often undermine what the characters think of themselves or would like others to think about them. We're going to take a look at one today that is even more, I think, more drastic than the wife of Bath, and that is the nun. And I will kind of walk you through that in a minute. Now, I'm going to save you all a lot of time and headache. Let me see if I could find this document. No, I'm going to email you a document. It is a chart that is filled out with all of the characters in the prologue, and it has their physical descriptions and then some key telling details about them and kind of a summary at the end of whether they're basically good people or not so good people. Okay? All right, so you've been through the prologue as I understand it, and you basically, I am told that you understand the basic formula for the prologue is basically it's a one long sentence that says, hey, basically when spring comes and all the good springy signs appear, like birds chirping and plants coming back to life, then people feel like going on these pilgrimages to pay homage to St. Thomas of Becket. And as we talked about in the video the other day, the Tabard Inn in London is where it all starts. And the narrator, presumably Chaucer, encountered 29 people and decided to join them on their pilgrimage, and the deal was that everyone would tell 2 stories on the way to Canterbury and 2 stories on the way back. That should have made a total of 120 stories, and of course Chaucer only got 22 complete and a couple of other scraps of other ones. Alright, so we're going to scroll down through. Here's the nun. Now this is a little blurry and a little bit dark, but it's I can read it. Here's what I want you to listen for as we read through this, and I will give you time to stop the video and discuss this a little bit. The nun, you'll notice that this rhymes, so we're just coming off the description of the yeoman, and the last line, he was a proper forester, I guess, and now we pick up the rhyme in the first line of the nun. There also was a nun, a prioress. And so what I want you to listen for as I read it, and as you pause and discuss, what is it that the nun seems to want to portray to other people by her actions and her dress? And then what do you think she's really like? This goes back to that characterization issue we talked about on the very first page. Remember, characterization, how we understand a character, is accomplished through 4 things. Okay, let's go scoot back to that real quick. The 4 things we're looking at are, how the character looks and dresses. That's going to be important with the nun. How the character speaks and acts. That will also be evident with the nun. What the character thinks and feels. We may have to dig for that one a little bit. And how others respond to the character. All right, so let's go back to the nun. And again, just to simplify things, let's keep these things in mind here. How do you think the nun wants to be viewed? And what kind of a person do you really think that she actually is? So here she is here, the prioress, or the nun. All right, let's read it through, because I don't think you have read this at all. So here's another character, pilgrim along the route to Canterbury. There also was a nun, prioress. Her way of smiling, very simple and coy. Her greatest oath was only by St. Loy. Now you have to look at some of the side notes here. St. Loy was known for his perfect manners. Anyway, by St. Loy, an oath here means like a curse. It's kind of like when you text OMG, for oh my God. There are people who would take offense to that and say, you really shouldn't throw God's name around like that. So her greatest oath was only by St. Loy. And she was known as Madame Eglantine. And well she sang a service with Eglantine. Let me start that over. And she was known as Madame Eglantine, and well she sang a service with a fine intoning through her nose, as was most seemly, and she spoke daintily in French extremely, after the school of Stratford at Bow. French in the Paris style she did not know. Now this is worth taking a look at. Stratford at Bow was a Benedictine convent near London where inferior French was spoken. The French are extremely proud people of their language, especially the Parisians. If you ever have a chance to travel, you will find that the people in the south of France are very, very different from the people in Paris. People in the northwestern part of France, in Brittany, where I studied when I was in college and where I lived with a host family, again, very, very different people. Not at all like the Parisians. Kind of like here in the United States, you look at a New Yorker, I mean a real New Yorker, yeah, they're American, but they're really different from us. Okay, so you can't say that all Americans are like New Yorkers. In the same way, you can't say that all French people are like the Parisians. They're kind of a special breed. So even in Chaucer's time, I think it's interesting, knowing that he wrote this in the 1300s, it was already apparent to the people of England because of their dealings with the French, going all the way back to William the Conqueror, 1066. It's already very apparent by the 14th century that the English have some very specific ideas and impressions of the French and their language and what was good and what was bad and what was classy and what was not classy. All right, so that's kind of a little clue right there about the nun. That, yeah, she speaks French, but she doesn't speak the best French. She doesn't speak the high French. Now, there's a lot here about her table manners, her eating. Pay attention to this and see if we can draw out some indirect characterization here. At meat, okay, meaning at supper, her manners were well taught withal. No morsel from her lips did she let fall, nor dipped her fingers in the sauce too deep, but she could carry a morsel up and keep the smallest drop from falling on her breast. Okay, now, she's not eating topless. Let's not go there, all right? We're just talking about the front of her habit, her gown. Okay, so guys, quit snickering. For courtliness she had a special zest, and she would wipe her upper lips so clean that not a trace of grease was to be seen upon the cup when she had drunk. To eat, she reached a hand sedately for the meat. She certainly was very entertaining, pleasant and friendly in her ways, and straining to counterfeit a courtly kind of grace, a stately bearing fitting to her place, and to seem dignified in all her dealings. As for her sympathies and tender feelings, she was so charitably solicitous, and back in Chaucer's time maybe more solicitous, she used to weep if she but saw a mouse caught in a trap, if it were dead or bleeding. And she had little dogs she would be feeding, now here's where it gets a little dark, with roasted flesh or milk or fine white bread. Roasted flesh just means roasted meat, okay, not somebody's arm or leg. And bitterly she wept if one were dead, or someone took a stick and made it smart. She was all sentiment and tender heart. Now we're going to talk about her veil in a second. One note on the word smart here. It's occurred to me over the years that sometimes people your age do not know that smart is another word for hurt. Okay, so if somebody smacks you or pinches you, you could say, "Ow, that smarts." I don't hear too many people say that anymore. It's a little antiquated, but that smarts is a substitute for saying, "Ow, that hurts." Okay, so that is what that means in that context. It means to hurt. So she would be very upset if one of her dogs died or someone made it hurt with a stick. All right, moving on to her clothing. Her veil was gathered in a seemly way. Her nose was elegant, her eyes glass gray. Her mouth was very small, but soft and red. Her forehead certainly was fair of spread, almost a span across the brows, I own. In other words, I declare. She was indeed by no means undergrown. Ooh, a little bit of a wide load, perhaps. Her cloak, I noticed, had a graceful charm. She wore a coral trinket on her arm, a set of beads, the gaudies tricked in green, whence hung a golden brooch of brightest sheen, on which there first was graven a crowned A, and lower, Amor vincit omnia. Another nun, the secretary at her cell, was riding with her, and 3 priests as well. Here's what I'd like you to do. Stop the video, and I want you to, with partners, and then led by your guest teacher, Mr. Cannell or Miss Butcher, whoever it is today, or whatever this hour is, what I'd like you to do is to take a few minutes, and I want you to go all the way back to these issues of characterization. Sorry, I'm flinging this all around the place. Anyway, and I want you to pick up on these things. Tell each other, how does she look and dress? Okay, there are very specific details in the text. How does she speak or act? What things can you pick up on? See if you can think about or infer maybe how she thinks or how she feels. I think there are some hints in there. And then how others respond to the character. I don't know if you'll find anything there or not. But you might speculate a little bit on how does she want to be viewed? How does she want other characters to respond to her? We're going to talk about her because this is a story about people taking a pilgrimage for religious purposes. And if you go through that prologue and study it in much more depth than we're going to, you will notice that Chaucer describes in his group of pilgrims a fair number of members of the church. So once you have discussed these characterization issues and found textual evidence for these things on the nun, also apply that to the pardoner, who is another member of the church, and to the wife of Bath. If you haven't done that already, apply those characterization traits to those characters. Okay, so the nun, the wife of Bath, and the knight. Okay, so spend some time doing that. And when you have finished that, the end goal, all the way down here, keep going, almost there, yes, is to work on some of these questions. I would say that based on what you have done up to this point, everybody should be able to answer number 1, number 2. Now, number 3 is going to take some doing, but I'm going to email you all a document in the next few minutes. It'll show up in your email that you can use. It's kind of like a little cheat sheet, but please use it. It's what it's there for. But yeah, you've got all these pilgrims. Put them in one of these 3 categories. You have the feudal system related to the land. In other words, so ordinary blue-collar workers. All church people, priests and nuns, etc., and then city people, your merchants, your professionals like doctor, a lawyer, somebody who, a merchant would be, of course, like a shopkeeper, somebody who is in business. Okay, so number 4, that you should be able to answer. And then number 5, we kind of have already been doing this with the, if you're going to do the wife of Bath, partner, and the nun, then you're doing this right here. Describe 3 pilgrims whose inner natures are revealed by their appearance, and talk about all of those. Talk about their appearances and all of that. Okay, so 1 through 5 by Thursday, and then I will check with your teachers and see how far you've gotten and make some final determinations for Thursday. All right, thanks for watching and listening. I know these are not super exciting, but it's good for me. I'm having fun. All right, I'll talk to you later. Bye.